Welcome, dear learners, to week 7. We are going to talk about climate drama and films in this lesson. They are topics that are extremely interesting, and it's like, when you read books, you have to use your imagination and you don't really have pictures before you. But film and drama is something that is live before you, and that is a medium that can affect the consciousness very deeply, and it is something that is a crowd puller. So many climate fiction books have been taken into films, have been converted into films and drama, and they have become more popular than ever. So there is no limit to all the text out there in the form of books that is turned into films, but we are talking about climate fiction being turned into climate drama and films. And there are some wonderful movies out there which are extremely engaging, very interesting, which are worth watching. So I recommend that you watch the movies that we are talking about so as to get a deeper understanding of how they deal with climate issues. And we all know literature, whether it is in books or in poetry, or it is in oral form, or it is in the form of drama, or in the form of films. It is very powerful, and it is determined by the culture. So the cultural settings uh, enrich these climate films and make them unique and memorable. So let us look at this genre of climate drama and films, and let us also get acquainted with some films which are very important if we are going to study climate change in literature. So let's define the genre. Climate drama and films are a specialized genre within the broader fields of cinema and television. And the primary focus is on themes related to climate change. There are numerous such films now on Netflix also, but a layman who has no idea of climate change in literature would not be able to appreciate it as well as you would, as you are studying climate change in literature on a very deep and extensive level. So climate dramas can range from documentaries that address scientific facts directly, or they can be real life phenomena to fictional works set in dystopian futures. This genre also incorporates hybrid formats where elements of science fiction and environmental documentaries intersect, aiming to bridge the gap between education and entertainment. So there might be mixed platforms, mixed styles uh, of narration in it, mixed presentations in climate change, and so it is all in all a very creative and innovative genre, and directors use their creativity to make the films sharper and more focused, and something that affects us through the multidimensional meanings and indications and symbols in these films. Documentaries focus on real life, real world impacts and facts, and highlight the scientific consensus on climate change. For instance, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. So, there are documentaries, numerous documentaries about resource depletion, about people surviving in the deserts, uh, issues related to extreme climate events. So these are just documentaries that just talk about the scientific facts and show the scientific consensus on climate change, and perhaps they suggest some resolutions, or they suggest that some action should be taken. They have some kind of message in them. But other than documentaries, there are fictional dramas also, which explore climate crisis through a narrative lens, often using personal stories of future dystopias to reflect the urgency of environmental action. So, fictional dramas can be personal stories picked up from real happenings and real events related to climate change and presented in the form of fiction, and they are turned into future dystopias, and they sort of tell us about the urgency of environmental action. Little while later, we would be discussing Snowpiercer, a very important climate film, and the direction is very creative. It is an amazing film about how human beings, they can alter the climate of the earth and then be trapped in the consequences. So it's a beautifully made film, and the whole cast is there in a train. So they don't step outside, it's just the train, and it is amazing the way it is made. Animations and experimental works use creative visuals to engage viewers, particularly children or young adults, in environmental advocacy. So, in these days also, we have a lot of animations and experimental presentations which create visuals to teach children to take care of the planet and take care of the earth, to plant seeds, to keep the environment clean. So, these are all by the way of educating children, and one of these very important films is Wall-E, which has been very popular, and it is an animation film based on a robot. There are various elements in the genre. There are a whole variety of elements and different categories of films when we talk about climate films. They can be disaster and catastrophe films, they can be personal and human stories, they can be scientific exploration. So, it is actually the story element that catches the viewer, and that builds the interest and the focus. So, even disaster and catastrophe films, they have well created stories in them, and they link the disaster and the catastrophe to human action. So, they, as the story goes on, there is scientific exploration also, or the entire film may be about scientific exploration, but the story is such that it will leave an impact on the viewer. What is the use of climate drama in films? As I mentioned when we started this lesson, climate drama and films are a very flexible genre, and it sort of is something very live and something that captures the audience much more than a book. And there is an illiterate population, for example, in India. So they sort of uh, understand films better. They take the material of films, and films impact their consciousness much more than the books that they cannot read. So when books in English are translated into Hindi and put into a film, well, the facts of science can reach an illiterate audience and empower them and inform them about climate change. So that is very important. That's why climate drama and films have a crucial role in addressing climate change. They build a sense of urgency, they shape public perception and awareness, as I just said. If it's an illiterate public, its books cannot do it, but films can shape the perception and awareness of these people. And thus, when people become aware, then public discourse and policy also gets affected and shaped by it. They create a global conversation, environmental advocacy and education. So when these films reach international platforms, they get a global conversation. Sometimes these films are in international, they win awards, or they are seen by millions around the world. So the film that may have been made on the story of some remote locality in India and perhaps some remote tribe or remote community, its problems get highlighted and it goes global through the film. So it helps in environmental advocacy and education. So not only the illiterate, but the children also get educated through films and drama. It is something that is very captivating, something that is different from books, a form of entertainment that can teach much to its viewers. So what about the history and evolution of climate in cinema? When and how did climate enter the world of cinema? So we would look at that by considering the early films. Early representations are environmental themes in early cinema, such as Fire, which was made in 1901, directed by James Williamson, dramatized urban fires and their destructive impact on society. Now you can see how futuristic such a film must have been, because the menace of fires has become a grave disaster today. So forest fires are a cause for great concern today, and this film was made in 1901. Mid-20th century films, for example, The Hurricane 1937, When Worlds Collide 1951, depicted large-scale natural calamities, storms, floods, and even planetary destruction. So extreme climate events were written on and created into climate films, and if they were not very frequent, then too they are futuristic, because these are the things that are being a climate threat for the entire world: hurricanes and other extreme climate events. The advent of environmental awareness. While cinema was slow to fully embrace environmental themes in this period, films like Soylent Green 1973 began to connect ecological collapse with human activities, depicting a dystopian future where environmental degradation leads to severe food shortages and societal breakdown. So there are many other films that follow the same line of environmental degradation and societal breakdown, but these are the early ones. Soylent Green 1973. So it seems that the earlier themes were worked on later also with more vigor and with more power in them, because climate change has loomed as a graver and graver threat with the passage of time. What happens to climate dramas in the present century? What do we know about the rise of contemporary climate cinema? So, there are many documentaries right now. So, the release of An Inconvenient Truth in 2006 was a watershed moment in climate cinema. Following An Inconvenient Truth, other significant documentaries like Before the Flood 2016 and Chasing Ice 2012 expanded the scope of climate cinema. So, as we already talked about it in earlier lessons in a different context, that it affected government policy, and it was a bold step for somebody who is in the world of politics to throw open the curtains and show the reality of climate change, which was being covered up by companies and by the government itself. So, when this documentary was shown, it set the movement for making such films. So, there were other documentaries after this in the same line, influenced by it. 2016 and 2012. There were also blockbuster fictional films. The Day After Tomorrow 2004, directed by Roland Emmerich, became a defining example of a climate focused disaster film. So, we can see how the gradual evolution of climate cinema came to this point of disaster films, all created by human meddling with nature. Then, animated films were also very important. For example, Wall E provided a powerful commentary on waste management, environmental collapse, and the consequences of human inactivity in presenting Earth's resources. So, Wall E is about the Earth becoming a place of garbage, and then people decide to move on other planets. So the story is something like that, and it talks about preserving the Earth's natural resources, keeping the Earth intact, and this kind of idea where the Earth becomes unlivable, and so the population emigrates to other planets is very common in science fiction. And so, climate film has borrowed this idea and put it in animation. So, Wall E has been a very popular animated film. Transition from science fiction to reality. Climate change narratives today. So, today, as climate change issues loom large and are a threat to the entire planet, the climate change narratives have undergone a change. So, it started with the roots in science fiction. Films like Silent Running 1972 and Logan's Run 1976 depicted futuristic worlds where environmental collapse had led to the demise of society. So, they were rooted in science fiction, but all the technology and the futuristic worlds were actually talking about environmental collapse and the demise of society. So, this is there in Margaret Atwood's novel Oryx and Crake too. So, such ideas were there in the gradual shift in the narratives. Shift to realism and documentaries. Documentaries such as The 11th Hour 2007 and Climate Refugees 2010 brought real world data and interviews with experts to the screen, educating audiences on the immediate consequences of global warming. So here we come into the reality of climate change, and these documentaries, The 11th Hour and Climate Refugees, show things directly to the viewers by interviewing experts and showing the actual data, and thus educating viewers and audiences about the serious consequences of global warming. So there is an experimental quality in these films too. There's a blurring of the line between fiction and reality. Films like First Reformed 2017, directed by Paul Schrader, explore the psychological and emotional toll of climate anxiety on individuals. So we discussed this a little bit earlier also. The major themes in climate films, which tend to categorize them also, are catastrophe and disaster, human versus nature, hope and resilience, dystopia and future survival. A lot of these films deal with such themes and many more to inform viewers about climate change reality. Um, there is a in many there's a struggle between man and nature, and some of the films they talk about how human beings try to get out of these dangerous impacts by fighting for resolutions, by keeping hope through resilience. Many of these talk about dystopia, but even in terms of dystopia, there's the idea of future survival, catastrophe, and disaster. So it means the destruction of the environment and civilization due to climate change. Natural disasters are used as plots. Films like The Day After Tomorrow, 2004, 2012 are primary examples of this genre. Environmental collapse and societal breakdown are shown in films like Mad Max, Fury Road, 2015, depicting a future where natural resources have been depleted and human society has descended into chaos. Mad Max, Fury Road um, is the second in the line of these films. The first one was on Mad Max. So it deals with humanity that has almost become savage. Instead of evolution into a civilized state, there's a collapse of society and they are almost like savages. And that can be shown in the violence of their lives. They are technologically very advanced, but there's a savagery and a violence in these people who try to survive in this resource-starved world. And for example, in Mad Max Fury Road, uh, there's a depletion of resources, there's a shortage of water, which eventually leads to conflict and the establishment of an authoritarian regime. So the whole story is about the furious clash and rebellion against that regime that controls water and controls human lives. So these futuristic films about environmental collapse and societal breakdown are extremely interesting to watch, and they give us a idea and a warning about the future if we do not take control of things now. It is inevitable if there is a depletion of major resources. If one doesn't have water or food to eat, one can understand what a struggle life would become. So this is what they show in this Mad Max, that water is such an important resource and how a certain gang tries to control it. So there's a fight to overcome this gang and to get freedom. So this is the story. So the plot is formed in its own way, and the film is made with very powerful techniques, very fine and sophisticated technology of films. So it is worth watching to better understand the idea of catastrophe and its development in films. It would be good to go and watch this movie. So these disaster films, they show the impact on vulnerable populations. For example, the documentary Climate Refugees 2010 explores how rising sea levels, desertification, and extreme weather events are forcing people in low-lying areas and arid regions to flee their homes, creating a new category of refugees. So, disaster is shown from different perspectives as its consequences, how it happens, and the description of the disaster. What are the political outcomes of it? What are the social outcomes of it? What happens to the human beings? What kind of race is created when things are like this? So, in that film, Mad Max Fury Road, it has been very well depicted that futuristic world in which people are starved for resources. They have lost all the protection and the comforts of civilization. They are living like savages in a desert. So everything is very pointed and very symbolic. Their habitation, their lives, their struggles, their machinery. So that's why I say it is an important film to watch. So, as we just said, these are the vulnerable populations that are shown in many of these films, and how they suffer, and the story comes out from there. Dramas exploring humanity's exploitation of natural resources. So there are many films that tell us about the mining of certain minerals and oils, or they might be about cutting down the forest. So man-made environmental degradation in Avatar 2009. It has been a very popular film. The central conflict revolves around the exploitation of the fictional planet Pandora's natural resources by a human mining corporation which threatens to destroy the indigenous people's way of life. So this is one theme that is covered in these films. I'll stop in this lesson and we'll continue with this later on. I hope this thing about films that we talked is interesting for you all, and you will go out and watch these films. Let's meet again in the next lesson. Thank you.